Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And today we're going to be taking a look at the death of 19-month-old Freya Garden.
Okay.
And we've got a whole stack of sources here for Young, interviews, court documents, news reports,
Wow.
all kind of swirling around this weekend back in 2005.
Oh, wow.
That ended in just heartbreak and really a whole lot of unanswered questions.
Sounds intriguing already.
Yeah, so are you ready to kind of unpack this one with me?
Absolutely, I am. What strikes me right away just glancing through these sources is that this isn't just a case about figuring out, how a toddler died. It really raises a lot of questions about the investigation itself, the reliability of eyewitness accounts, and especially from a young teenager,
Oh, yeah.
and how a legal system grapples with these complex, emotionally charged cases.
Absolutely. So let's kind of set the stage here for everybody. It's Martin Luther King Jr. holiday weekend.
Okay.
Freya's mom, Morningstar Garden, and her boyfriend, Gratian Klein, are heading out to a party.
Mm-hmm.
They ask 13-year-old Ashley House, family acquaintance, to watch Freya and her 5-year-old sister, Malene.
Okay.
Seems pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, at first glance, you would think so.
Yeah.
But, as I was looking through this stuff, these sources reveal some red flags that pop up almost immediately.
Yeah.
Initially, the plan was for Ashley's older stepsister to actually supervise the kids at a motel.
Okay.
But then that changes, and they all end up at Gratian's house, which is described as, sparsely furnished, which just adds to this kind of unsettling vibe.
Yeah, and it gets even more unsettling because Ashley ends up being alone with these children for these long stretches of time.
Right.
And both she and her parents voice concerns about this to Morningstar.
Yeah, and their behavior just adds to the suspicion. I mean, they're consistently described as evasive in these reports. They spend most of their time behind a closed bedroom door.
Right.
And when Ashley's parents finally do speak to Morningstar, they come away with this feeling like something just isn't right.
Yeah, there's this underlying tension through all these reports and interviews.
Yeah.
And then the police find drugs in Morningstar and Gratian's bedroom,
Oh, wow.
along with a receipt for beer, malt liquor, and baking soda.
Okay, so I'm assuming that baking soda detail is pretty important here.
Yeah, it is. So the baking soda is often used to cut cocaine.
Oh, I see.
So this kind of points towards a level of drug activity that's, more serious than just casual use.
Right, so it really makes you question their state of mind,
Yeah.
their judgment, their priorities. It casts a pretty big shadow over the whole weekend.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, Ashley's describing Freya as being a bit fussy and whiny over the weekend and even taking a few tumbles.
Okay, but this is where things get really complicated and heartbreaking. Medical professionals later on state that Freya's injuries are more consistent with violent shaking than with, those accidental falls that Ashley's describing.
Right. So we have this discrepancy between Ashley's account and what the medical evidence is showing.
Exactly.
And that discrepancy leads to this really controversial interrogation.
Okay.
So Ashley, a 13-year-old girl, is questioned for nearly 19 hours straight without a parent or lawyer present.
That's a long time, especially for a young girl. It's just hard to even imagine the pressure that she must have been under.
Yeah.
I mean, reading through these sources, you see that the detectives, they introduce the word shake into the conversation
Right.
before Ashley ever uses it.
Oh, wow.
And then there's this moment where she's demonstrating a wiggling motion with a doll.
Okay.
And they immediately interpret that as shaking.
Wow.
But in a letter that Ashley writes later, she uses the word wiggled, not shaken.
Right. Yeah. And even the judge later criticizes the detective's conduct, calling it coercive and manipulative.
Wow.
It seems like they were really looking for a specific answer,
Yeah.
and they just kept pushing until they got it.
And so because of that judicial criticism, what happens, the judge throws out those videotaped confessions.
Yeah.
And without that evidence...
The case against Ashley completely crumbles and is dismissed.
Wow.
So you can imagine the range of reactions here.
Right.
Freya's family is devastated.
Right.
They feel like justice was totally sidestepped.
Right.
They believe Ashley got off on a technicality.
Mm-hmm.
Ashley's defense attorney, on the other hand, insists on her innocence and really points the finger at how the investigation was handled.
So we're kind of left with this question, was this a failure of the justice system?
Yeah.
Or did this 13-year-old girl become a scapegoat in a rush to just, find some explanation for this really awful tragedy?
Right. And it gets even more complicated because Ashley ends up filing a lawsuit against the city of Seattle and those detectives.
Oh, really?
And she eventually receives a $215,000 settlement.
Which really makes you think about how this case was approached.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't definitively prove Ashley's innocence or guilt,
Right.
But it does acknowledge that something went seriously wrong in that interrogation room.
Absolutely. So we have this case dismissal,
Mm-hmm.
and we still have this question, what truly happened to Freya?
Right.
And the investigation into Morningstar and Gratian seems almost like it was an afterthought. It was delayed and, according to a lot of these sources, noticeably less thorough.
Huh.
So we have the drug use.
Yeah.
We have that suspicious receipt.
Right.
We have their evasive behavior.
Yeah.
There's even information about Morningstar having a history with Child Protective Services.
Wow.
And the unexplained death of another child years before.
That's huge.
Yeah, and then you add to that Gratian's criminal record.
Oh, wow.
And it paints a very disturbing picture.
And yet they're still considered to be ruled out as suspects.
Yeah, according to the authorities, Ashley's account was enough to rule them out.
It's just hard to believe.
No, it's so strange. So we're left with this web of possibilities.
Yeah.
And this uneasy feeling that we're just missing crucial pieces of this puzzle.
Definitely.
This little girl who's described as a butterfly never fully let out of its cocoon.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
She's gone and no one is held accountable.
Yeah, it really makes you think, what if those interviews with Morningstar and Gratian hadn't been delayed?
Right.
You know what might a more thorough investigation have revealed?
Exactly. 8 days passed before they were even brought in for questioning.
Wow.
8 days.
That's a lot of time for evidence to be tampered with, for stories to be aligned.
Right. You know, memories fade, details get muddled.
Exactly.
It makes you think about all those what ifs.
Yeah, what if the investigation had focused on all the adults involved from the very beginning?
Right.
Would it have changed the outcome?
And we can't ignore that Morningstar had previous involvement with Child Protective Services, and then there was that unexplained death of another child.
Yeah, it's a detail that just kind of hangs there
It does.
with all these unanswered questions.
Yeah. And then Gratian's criminal record, you know, the sources don't get into specifics, but it just adds another layer of complexity here.
Yeah, for sure.
This wasn't just some random group of people
Right.
thrown together by circumstance.
There's history there. Connections that really warrant a closer look.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
And it's important to remember that Ashley, despite that settlement, she still lives with this shadow of suspicion.
She was 13 years old.
Mm.
Can you imagine being at the center of a murder investigation?
I can't.
Even if you're eventually cleared. The emotional toll that has to be unimaginable.
And in this case, it isn't just about legal outcomes or technicalities.
Yeah.
It's about the impact on real lives.
Absolutely.
Ashley's life, Freya's family, this is about more than just a case file. It's about the ripple effects of trauma and loss.
It really makes you think about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
This case, it forces us to confront our own biases about who we perceive as capable of violence.
Yeah, especially when it comes to children.
Right.
Yeah.
We tend to have this idea, childhood is a time of innocence.
Right.
And it's so hard to reconcile that with the very real possibility that someone so young could be involved in something so horrific.
Absolutely.
It's like we almost have this need to identify a clear villain
Right.
and an innocent victim.
Yeah, we want simple answers.
Yeah.
Even in these situations that are anything but simple.
Right. And as we've seen in this deep dive, those lines are often blurred,
Definitely.
especially in a case like this.
Mm.
We have Ashley, who may very well have been wrongly accused, but we also have this family who's grappling with this unimaginable loss,
Right.
desperately seeking some kind of closure.
Yeah, and that's where the limitations of the justice system kind of become apparent.
Right.
It's designed to determine guilt or innocence based on these very specific legal standards,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't always provide that emotional resolution
Right.
that everyone's looking for.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that even though the case against Ashley was dismissed, it doesn't mean she was exonerated.
Right.
It just means that the prosecution couldn't meet that burden of proof.
Exactly.
So we're left with this lingering uncertainty.
Yeah, for everyone.
Hanging over everybody involved.
Mm-hmm.
Ashley might have been spared a prison sentence, but she'll likely carry this experience with her for the rest of her life.
Absolutely. And what about Freya's family? They've lost a child.
Under such awful circumstances.
Yeah, and their circumstances remain shrouded in mystery.
Right.
There's no legal outcome that can truly erase that grief and those unanswered questions.
This deep dive has been really a journey through some dark territory.
It has.
But it has shown us how important critical thinking is.
Yes.
Questioning our assumptions and recognizing that, human emotions,
Right.
biases, errors are inevitably woven into this whole legal process.
Absolutely. We've explored the complexities of these investigations,
Hmm.
the power dynamics, that are at play in an interrogation room,
Right.
the potential for mistakes, individual and systemic,
Yeah.
to really impact the pursuit of justice.
Yeah. And maybe the most important takeaway here is that behind those headlines and the court documents and the legal arguments are real people
Right.
whose lives have been profoundly affected by this tragedy.
Freya's story, as unsettling as it serves as a reminder of the
Yeah.
importance of protecting children, supporting families, and pushing for a justice system that's both fair and compassionate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
What can we learn from Freya's case? How can we use this knowledge to be better advocates for children,
Mm.
to be more informed citizens, and to be more empathetic members of our communities?
It's a question worth pondering.
It is.
Yeah.
The answers might not be easy, but it's so important to keep asking those questions.